Sit back and enjoy 2 hours of fascinating facts you didn't know. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Let's get started. NASA's Gemini 7 mission lasted 14 days. After rendezvousing with Gemini 6 on the 11th day, the two astronauts had nothing left to do except read books inside the extremely cramped spacecraft. Commander Frank Borman said the last 3 days were miserable. More than 16 people are known to have died after falling from the Great Pyramids of Giza over the past 200 years. For much of that time, visitors were allowed to climb the pyramids with very few restrictions, despite the steep sides, the height of the stone blocks, and the lack of safety measures. Today, climbing the pyramids is prohibited by Egyptian authorities to protect both the monuments and visitors. Even so, illegal climbing attempts are still occasionally reported and can result in arrests or penalties. The loneliest whale in the world is nicknamed the 52 Hertz whale. It appears to be the only individual that sings at this frequency anywhere in the world. The whale itself has never actually been seen. Its call was first detected using underwater hydrophones that monitored the ocean, and it has since been recorded during different seasons while traveling long distances. Scientists still do not know for certain what species it belongs to and have proposed several hypotheses, including that it may be a whale with a vocal anomaly or a hybrid. The Hass avocado, which accounts for more than 80% of the avocados grown in the United States, was patented in 1935 after an accidental seedling produced fruit that Hass's children enjoyed and told him about. Leprosy still exists and affects approximately 200,000 people each year, but it is highly curable and generally requires months of close contact to be transmitted from another person. The disease, also known as Hansen's disease, is treated with a combination of antibiotics that is often available free of charge in many countries through international health programs. When diagnosed and treated early, most permanent complications can be prevented. The vast majority of people also have a natural immunity that makes it difficult for the disease to develop even after exposure. Broccoli was not widely available in grocery stores across the United Kingdom and Ireland until the late 1970s. Before that time, it was an uncommon crop, and many people had never tried it. Its popularity grew thanks to the expansion of supermarkets, improvements in distribution systems, and increased interest in adding new vegetables to everyday diets. Over time, it went from being a relatively unknown product to becoming a common ingredient in soups, salads, side dishes, and many homemade dishes. When Chi-Chi, a giant panda from the London Zoo, was taken to Moscow to breed with a male giant panda, she rejected his mating attempts and instead displayed reproductive behavior toward a zookeeper. Since 2005, new elements have been added to the periodic table. The seventh row of the periodic table has finally been completed. The most recent elements were synthesized in laboratories through collisions between atomic nuclei and exist for only fractions of a second before decaying. They include nihonium, moscovium, tennessine, and oganesson, whose names were officially approved in 2016. Scientists continue to investigate the possibility of creating even heavier elements that could eventually expand the periodic table with an eighth row. Carotenemia is a harmless condition that is often mistaken for jaundice and is caused by the prolonged consumption of carrots and other foods rich in carotene. It can also occur after eating large amounts of pumpkin, sweet potatoes, mangoes, or other foods high in carotenoids. Unlike jaundice, the whites of the eyes remain their normal color, which helps distinguish the two conditions. The yellowish discoloration usually fades gradually after reducing the intake of these foods and typically does not cause health problems. The largest known object in the universe is the Hercules Corona Borealis Great Wall, and it stretches across 10 billion light-years. This gigantic structure is made up of enormous clusters of galaxies and was identified by analyzing the distribution of gamma-ray bursts, which serve as markers of extremely distant regions of the cosmos. Its size is so extraordinary that it has sparked intense debate among astronomers because it appears to exceed the dimensions that some cosmological models consider possible for a structure of this kind. Under German wine law, it is completely illegal to ferment mechanically frozen grapes. To produce the prestigious wine known as Eiswein, the grapes must freeze naturally on the vine and be harvested while they are still frozen. If producers freeze them artificially, the wine can no longer be sold under that name. Because it depends entirely on the weather, some Eiswein harvests are extremely scarce, and there are even years when many wineries are unable to produce a single bottle. Belgian authorities destroyed more than 23 cans of an American beer marketed as the champagne of beers because the slogan was considered an improper use of the term champagne. Champagne is legally protected and reserved exclusively for sparkling wine produced in the Champagne region of France. During World War II, an event known as the Yellow River Flood occurred when China deliberately destroyed its own dams and levees in a tragic attempt to create defensive flood barriers. This intentional effort to slow the enemy's advance resulted in the drowning deaths of an estimated 400,000 to 500,000 Chinese civilians. In the early 1970s, Boeing proposed an oil transport aircraft with a wingspan of 500 feet. It would have been powered by 12 engines based on the Boeing 747 design. A fleet of these aircraft would have operated 24 hours a day, transporting crude oil from Prudhoe Bay to the Pacific coast. Instead, the Alaska Pipeline was built. There is an exact, better-preserved copy of the Mona Lisa, created by one of Leonardo da Vinci's students that was painted at the same time in the same studio as Leonardo's original. It reveals details that are no longer visible in the original Mona Lisa. Thanks to that version, experts have been able to see elements of the background landscape, the chair the model is sitting on, and parts of her veil much more clearly, all of which were obscured over time by aging varnish on the painting displayed at the Louvre. Former Washington Commanders owner Dan Snyder once owned Six Flags and ultimately drove the company into bankruptcy. Snyder led a group of investors that acquired the company in the late 1990s and promoted rapid expansion through the purchase of additional parks and other debt-financed operations. The heavy debt eventually severely damaged the company's finances, and a few years later, Six Flags filed for bankruptcy protection to reorganize. The company later reduced its debt and continued operating under new management. The Parliament of Canada maintains a record of debates in both English and French, known as Hansard. During a Liberal filibuster in the Canadian Senate, Senator Philippe Gigantès was accused of reading one of his own books solely to have it translated for free through Hansard in 1977. Beginning in 2001, Del Glover became the world's leading source of leaked music before its official release. He worked at a Universal compact disc pressing plant and was a member of a file-sharing group called Rabid Neurosis. Over a period of 11 years, Rabid Neurosis was responsible for leaking more than 20,000 albums. In 1862, John Langdon Down became the first physician to describe a distinct intellectual disability, calling it Mongolism, because he believed the children who had it shared certain facial features. It is now known as Down syndrome, and in the 1950s, it was discovered to be caused by the presence of an extra copy of chromosome 21. During the development of Rockstar Games' Red Dead Redemption 2, Roger Clark, the actor who voiced Arthur Morgan, was told he had to re-record his voice lines for the horse because they sounded too intimate. The director said it did not sound like he was talking to a horse, and after listening to the recording, the actor agreed to redo the lines. Wasps and hornets, despite being primarily carnivorous, are actually important pollinators that are beneficial to have in the garden for reasons beyond simply controlling other pests. Many species visit flowers to feed on nectar, and while doing so, they carry pollen between different plants. They also help keep populations of caterpillars, aphids, and other insects that damage crops and gardens under control. Even some fruit trees, herbs, and wildflowers receive part of their pollination thanks to the constant activity of these insects. Television personality Billy the Exterminator joined the Air Force at the age of 19 with the intention of pursuing a career in law enforcement. However, his military entrance exam showed that he had an aptitude for biology, which led him to a career in pest control. Scotland was once home to scorpions that measured 2 feet in length. These ancient arthropods lived hundreds of millions of years ago, when the region's climate and ecosystems were vastly different from those of today. The known specimens belonged to an extinct group of marine and brackish water scorpions related to the Eurypterids, some of the largest arthropods ever to exist. Their fossils have allowed paleontologists to reconstruct what Scotland's ancient environments were like long before the appearance of the dinosaurs. Lindsay Namioka, who was born in China, has a name that cannot be written in any Chinese language. Her linguist father found 2 Chinese syllables, len and sei, that are not used in words, so they have no Chinese characters. She is the only known person with that name. Peter Mayhew, the actor who played Chewbacca, carried a script during the original trilogy and spoke with Harrison Ford and the rest of the cast in English on set to cue them to deliver their lines. The Wookiee's voice was added during post-production. Guangdong Province in southern China has a population of about 127 million people in an area smaller than the state of Missouri. In addition to being the country's most populous province, It is one of the world's leading industrial and technology hubs. Cities such as Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and Dongguan are home to thousands of factories and high-tech companies, making the region a key center for producing phones, computers, household appliances, and many other products exported to virtually every continent. When Steve Jobs was 13 years old, Bill Hewlett of Hewlett-Packard gave him a summer job after Jobs cold-called him to ask for parts for an electronics project. Hewlett was impressed by the young man's initiative and, in addition to providing the components he needed, offered him a summer job at one of the company's facilities. There, Jobs had the opportunity to work alongside engineers and gain first-hand experience in the development of electronic products, an experience that influenced his interest in technology and computer design. Fred Durst directed a movie starring John Travolta and Devon Sawa that earned only $4,000 at the box office. The film, titled The Fanatic, received a very limited theatrical release before quickly moving to digital platforms and home video, which is why its box office earnings were so low. Even so, it attracted attention for Travolta's unusual performance and the mixed reviews it received. Over time, the movie has gained something of a cult following among some film fans because of its unusual style. Richard Nixon's daughter married Dwight Eisenhower's grandson. Julie Nixon married David Eisenhower at the White House during her father's presidency, bringing together two of the most influential political families in 20th century America. They had known each other since their teenage years and were in a relationship for several years before getting married. David Eisenhower later became a historian and university professor specializing in American political and military history. In 2003, rapper Pusha T wrote McDonald's advertising jingle, "I'm Lovin' It," but he does not own any publishing rights to it. Learning from that mistake, he secured 40% ownership of the next advertising jingle he wrote for Arby's. Islam spread into North Africa because a general decided to ignore his orders. The caliph sent a letter instructing his general not to invade Egypt. Suspecting it contained orders to withdraw, the general said he would open it at the end of the day, by which time he had already crossed the border. Kevin Costner turned down the lead role in Air Force One in 1997 so he could star in The Postman in 1997, a movie that he also directed. Air Force One was both a critical and commercial success, while The Postman was a box office failure, and Costner won 2 Razzie Awards for Worst Actor and Worst Director. The oldest known writing system in the world, Sumerian cuneiform, is more than 5,000 years old, and only 5 to 10% of all the recovered tablets have ever been translated. There were female gladiators known as gladiatrices. They fought one another and, on occasion, wild animals to entertain audiences in ancient Rome. Although they were far less common than male gladiators, reliefs, inscriptions, and historical texts confirm that they took part in public spectacles. Their presence was considered a rarity and attracted great curiosity from spectators. At the beginning of the 2nd century, Emperor Septimius Severus banned women from fighting in the arena, bringing the practice to an end. Theaters once hired people to attend performances and clap, cry, or laugh at the appropriate moments in order to influence the audience's reactions. These groups were known as claques and became especially popular in several European countries during the 19th century. In some cities, there were even organizations devoted exclusively to providing this service, with members specializing in standing ovations, laughter, tears, or calls for an encore. Their influence became so significant that some performers and theater owners hired them regularly to help ensure the success of a production or performer. In 1986, while filming the Bangles music video for Walk Like an Egyptian, Susanna Hoffs moved her eyes from side to side to look at certain audience members as a way to cope with stage fright. She had no idea that the camera was filming a close-up at that moment, or that it would become the video's defining shot and one of its most iconic moments. Kiyohime was a young woman from Japanese folklore who fell in love with a monk named Anchin, who rejected her. She became so enraged while chasing him that she transformed into a dragon and melted him while he hid inside a bell. Several theatrical adaptations of the story in Japan date back 1,000 years. The temperature on the moon at the Apollo 11 landing site was approximately 93 degrees Celsius, or 200 degrees Fahrenheit, when the astronauts stepped onto the surface. Because the moon has virtually no atmosphere, temperatures fluctuate dramatically between the lunar day and night. For that reason, the astronauts' spacesuits and the lunar module incorporated specialized insulation and thermal control systems to protect both the crew and their equipment in such a hostile environment. Sid Vicious got his name from a friend's hamster named Sid, which bit him. After the bite, musician John Simon Ritchie exclaimed that the little animal was truly vicious, and the nickname stuck. Years later, he officially adopted the stage name Sid Vicious when he became the bassist for the Sex Pistols. Over time, the name became one of the most recognizable in the history of British punk and became closely associated with the band's rebellious image. The king cobra is not actually a cobra. In fact, it is the only species in its genus and simply resembles a true cobra. Its scientific name is Ophiophagus hanna, while true cobras belong to the genus Naja. In addition to this taxonomic difference, the king cobra has a very unusual diet, feeding primarily on other snakes, including venomous species. It is also the longest venomous snake in the world, and one of the few that builds a nest to protect its eggs until they hatch. In 2015, former Central Intelligence Agency Director John Brennan had his email account compromised by a teenager who called Verizon customer service and pretended to be a company technician. Matt Damon, through his social enterprises Water.org and Water Equity, raised $150 million in just 1 month from Starbucks, Gap, DuPont, and other major companies. The initiative aims to continue expanding access to safe water and sanitation in parts of Asia and Africa. There is a banned French dish that involves eating a small bird called an ortolan bunting whole, including the bones. It has been banned because the species came close to extinction and because of the controversy surrounding the way the bird is prepared. The bird is force-fed millet to fatten it and is then drowned in Armagnac. Cerro Rico in Bolivia has been an active silver mine for nearly 500 years. Workers there have a life expectancy of about 40 years because of dust inhalation and mercury poisoning. Because of Woody Harrelson's strict vegan lifestyle, the Twinkies featured in the movie Zombieland, in which he plays a character obsessed with the snack, were replaced with vegan imitation Twinkies made from cornmeal. Google image search was created because of the green Versace silk dress Jennifer Lopez wore to the Grammy Awards in early 2000. The enormous demand for pictures of that dress made it clear that users wanted to search for specific images, not just web pages. In response, Google developed its image search service, which launched the following year with millions of indexed photographs. In April 2018, Robert Pope completed the Forrest Gump Run, during which he ran across the United States 5 times in 422 days. He is estimated to have run about 15,607 miles. As the first thing he did after finishing the run, he proposed to his girlfriend. Topographical disorientation is the inability to navigate one's own surroundings. Some people have been affected since childhood despite having no apparent brain damage, neurological condition, or cognitive impairment. Those who have it can become lost even in places they have traveled through for years, such as their own neighborhood or the route to work, so they often depend on maps, navigation systems, or very specific landmarks to find their way. It is believed that this condition is related to differences in the brain networks responsible for spatial processing and place recognition. The high priest of Jupiter in ancient Rome was subject to many restrictions, including not being allowed to touch or ride a horse, not being allowed to wear a knot anywhere on his clothing, not being allowed to walk beneath vines, and not being allowed to touch or even name a dog. Germany had secret plans to invade Boston and New York City before the First World War. The invasion would have required 60 warships and 100,000 soldiers. German troops were supposed to land at Cape Cod and Sandy Hook, New Jersey, and shell Boston and Manhattan in an effort to spread panic among civilians. A California man named Gary Brooks Faulkner attempted to hunt Osama bin Laden armed with a katana and night vision goggles. The city with the most roundabouts in the world in terms of the percentage of intersections is Carmel, Indiana. The city began replacing traditional intersections with roundabouts in the late 1990s to improve safety and reduce traffic congestion. Today, it has more than 150 roundabouts, which have significantly reduced crashes involving serious injuries while also cutting drivers' wait times and fuel consumption by keeping traffic moving continuously. Before telephones, fire alarm boxes were located on street corners. To prevent false alarms and pranks, some boxes were designed with handcuffs that secured the person who pulled the alarm to the box, and only a firefighter had the key to release them. Weather forecasters tend to overestimate the chance of rain, because if it rains after they said it would not, people get angry. But if it does not rain after they said it would, people are happy. This is known as wet bias. Before whistles were introduced, hockey referees used cowbells. They had to switch to whistles when fans started bringing their own cowbells to disrupt the game. Murphy was a disabled bald eagle who became famous after trying to hatch a rock. In 2023, the caretakers at his sanctuary replaced the rock with an orphaned eaglet, allowing Murphy to finally become a real father. The golden rule of treating others the way you want to be treated exists among emotionally intelligent primates, such as chimpanzees and bonobos. Studies of their behavior have shown that these animals often return favors, share food with trusted allies, and comfort members of their group after conflicts. Although they do not consciously follow a moral rule like humans do, these behaviors of reciprocity and cooperation strengthen social bonds and increase the chances of survival within the community. Exploding head syndrome causes people to hear a loud and frightening noise as they are falling asleep or waking up. Up to 10% of people may experience it, but many cases go undiagnosed. Episodes are often described as explosions, bangs, gunshots, or thunderclaps, even though no external sound actually exists. Despite how alarming the experience can be, this sleep disorder generally does not cause physical harm or brain injury. For many people, it occurs only occasionally and may be triggered by stress, sleep deprivation, or extreme fatigue. Some schools of fish are so noisy because of their constant chatter that not only is it dangerous to dive among them due to the sound, which is similar to a lawnmower or a chainsaw, but they can also be heard from boats above the water as a faint rumble. Species such as croakers, toadfish, and certain grunts produce sounds by vibrating special muscles or grinding their pharyngeal teeth. These underwater choruses help attract mates, defend territory, or coordinate spawning. And in some places, they are so intense that researchers use them to locate large concentrations of fish without seeing them directly. Many shark species can be turned upside down to induce a defensive response known as tonic immobility. In this state, they remain temporarily motionless for several minutes, allowing researchers to perform health examinations, attach tracking devices, or collect samples with less stress for the animal. Not all species respond the same way, and the duration of the effect can vary. Outside of scientific research and conservation work, this procedure should not be attempted because it can pose a risk to both people and the shark. The city of Florence, Oregon, accidentally outlawed having sex. In 2004, the average television screen measured 25.4 inches, and the average selling price was $552. By comparison, in 2019, the average screen size had increased to 47 inches, while the average selling price had dropped to just $336. A man during the Middle Ages wrote a book claiming that witches stole men's genitals, kept them in a nest, fed them oats, and treated them like pets. He was partly responsible for helping spark the witch trials in Europe. The word ZIP in zip code stands for Zone Improvement Plan, which has been in use since 1963 and contributes $10 billion annually to the United States economy. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak created Breakout, the iconic arcade game from the 1970s. They built it as a single-player evolution of Pong. To reduce cleaning costs, Amsterdam Airport printed images of flies inside its urinals, believing that men would aim at the flies while using the restroom, reducing the amount of urine that landed outside the urinals. And the plan worked. While clearing the World Trade Center site in the early 2000s, crews discovered a shipwreck 7 feet beneath the foundation dating back to 1773. The vessel was uncovered during excavations to rebuild the site and had been preserved by the mud and the lack of oxygen underground. Analysis of the wood determined its age and revealed that it had been built from oak trees harvested in the Philadelphia region. Archaeologists believe the ship was used as landfill to extend Manhattan's shoreline during the colonial era. The nation of Costa Rica has no military. The military was abolished in 1948 after that year's Civil War, and the decision was incorporated into the Constitution the following year. Since then, the country has devoted a greater share of its resources to areas such as education, healthcare, and environmental protection. Internal security is handled by specialized police forces, while the defense of its sovereignty relies on international law and cooperation with other countries. Stu Unger, widely considered one of the greatest gin and Texas Hold'em players of all time, won an estimated $30 million during his poker career. However, he died without any assets in his name after losing much of his money betting on horse racing and sports, while also struggling with drug addiction. Elmo not only has a father, but his father is also a soldier who served in Iraq. The character's name is Louis, and within the Sesame Street universe, he is a United States Army veteran. His story was introduced to help military families talk with children about deployments, returning home, and the challenges of life after military service. Through these episodes, the program addressed topics such as family adjustment, stress, and emotional support in a simple way that was appropriate for young audiences. Acetaminophen poisoning is the second most common cause of liver transplants worldwide, and the leading cause of liver transplants in the United States. It is responsible for 56,000 emergency room visits, 26,000 hospitalizations, and 500 deaths each year in the United States. Buzz Aldrin, from the Apollo 11 mission, was nicknamed Dr. Rendezvous by his fellow NASA astronauts. Aldrin, who held a doctorate from MIT, knew it was not meant as a compliment. The nickname referred to his expertise in orbital rendezvous and docking techniques, a subject many of his colleagues considered overly academic. However, that knowledge proved essential to the Apollo program because docking maneuvers between the command module and the lunar module were critical for the missions to return safely to Earth. The patent for the transistor was filed 21 years before a working one was actually built. The concept was described by inventor Julius Edgar Lilienfeld in the 1920s, but the limitations of materials and manufacturing techniques at the time prevented the creation of a practical device. It was not until the late 1940s that advances in semiconductor physics made functional transistors possible, a breakthrough that transformed modern electronics and paved the way for computers, cell phones, and virtually every digital device used today. The Boots theory of socioeconomic unfairness states that people with limited financial resources buy inexpensive products that need to be replaced repeatedly, making them more expensive over time than higher-priced items in the short term. The idea was popularized by writer Terry Pratchett in his Discworld novels and is often used to illustrate how a lack of financial resources can lead to greater cumulative expenses over time. Although it is a literary metaphor, economists and public policy experts frequently cite it to explain phenomena related to the cost of poverty, such as limited access to durable goods, credit, or higher quality housing. Most animals can see ultraviolet light. Humans being blind to it is actually the exception rather than the rule. Many birds, insects, fish, reptiles, and some mammals use this ability to find food, identify flowers more easily, recognize one another, or detect traces that are invisible to us. Many plants display patterns visible only under ultraviolet light, serving as signals that guide pollinators to nectar. This type of vision can also improve navigation and prey detection in certain species. In addition to being an actor and activist, Marlon Brando was also an inventor with 4 patents to his name. One of them was a pair of pool shoes designed to increase traction while walking on the bottom of a swimming pool for a better workout. And another invention was a uniquely tunable conga drum. The Aldgate pump is a historic water pump that marks the beginning of London's East End. Long famous for its sparkling, pleasant-tasting water, it was later discovered that its rich mineral flavor came from the flesh and bones of nearby cemeteries that had seeped into the water. Linguists estimate that at least half of the world's 6,500 languages will disappear within the next 100 years. That means, on average, one language dies every 2 weeks. Most of these languages have very few speakers and, in many cases, are no longer being learned by younger generations. When a language disappears, an important part of traditional knowledge, oral history, cultural expression, and unique ways of understanding the world disappear with it. As a result, many communities and organizations are working on documentation, education, and revitalization projects to preserve this linguistic heritage. An annual elephant beauty pageant has been held at Chitwan National Park in Nepal since 2010, and the most recent winner, Selfie Kelly, was crowned in December 2023 for her vibrant coloring and graceful movements. Officially, there are no pets in Vatican City. Although some residents may keep animals in private areas, the tiny state does not maintain a registered population of household pets like other countries do. However, it is common to see cats around gardens, courtyards, and historic buildings, where they are often fed by workers and visitors. Birds and other animals also wander in from Rome, since the Vatican's borders are fully integrated into the surrounding urban environment and do not prevent their entry. In 2012, 2 drunken tourists stole a penguin named Dirk from an aquarium after breaking into SeaWorld in Queensland, Australia. They released him into a canal the following day, but were spotted by local residents who reported them. Both men were fined about 637 pounds and did not receive any jail time. There are more than 20,000 edible plant species in the world, yet only 20 of them make up 90% of the food we eat. Much of the world's food supply depends on crops such as rice, wheat, corn, potatoes, and soybeans. This concentration makes large-scale production easier, but it also makes the food supply more vulnerable to pests, diseases, and climate change. For this reason, farmers and scientists preserve seeds from lesser-used varieties that may provide new flavors, nutrients, and resistance to extreme conditions. Word pairs such as artsy-fartsy, super-duper, and itsy-bitsy are a linguistic phenomenon known as rhyming reduplication. Super Bowl 34 is known as the dot-com Super Bowl because it featured 14 commercials from 14 different dot-com companies, each paying an average of $2.2 million for advertising time. Of those companies, 4 are still in business, 5 were acquired by other companies, and the remaining 5 have disappeared completely. Babies younger than 1 year old should not be fed honey. Their intestines are still developing and do not yet have the beneficial bacteria needed to fight certain organisms that may be present in honey. Those bacteria can produce toxins that may make an infant seriously ill. During the witch trials, spectral evidence, which was evidence based on visions, was considered a form of legal evidence and, if accepted, was almost impossible for lawyers to refute. However, people at the time could not agree on whether the devil was capable of taking the form of an innocent person. Hewlett-Packard once sold iPods, and those devices could not be serviced at Apple stores because they were not considered Apple products. Leonard Nimoy refused to join Star Trek the Animated Series without George Takei or Nichelle Nichols, saying that they represented the proof of ethnic diversity in the 23rd century. Noah syndrome is an extreme form of animal hoarding disorder. People who suffer from it accumulate more pets than they can properly feed, clean, or provide with veterinary care. Yet, they often deny that there is a problem. Unlike an irresponsible breeder, the person usually believes they are rescuing or protecting the animals. Severe cases can result in unsanitary living conditions, disease, uncontrolled breeding, and profound social isolation, often requiring intervention from veterinarians, social services, and mental health professionals. Although dogs do not pass the traditional mirror test, they do pass an olfactory mirror test, suggesting that they understand the concept of self. In this experiment, researchers compared dogs' reactions to their own scent, the scent of other dogs, and altered versions of their own odor. The results show that dogs pay much more attention to the altered samples, as though they detect that something has changed about their own chemical identity. This finding has led several scientists to propose that self-awareness does not depend solely on vision, and that different species may recognize aspects of themselves using the sense that is most highly developed. Animals that lack teeth for grinding food, such as birds and some fish, have a specialized stomach that contains small stones to perform that function. This structure, known as the gizzard, uses powerful muscles to grind food with the help of those stones, called gastroliths, before digestion continues. In addition to birds, reptiles such as crocodiles and some species of dinosaurs also used gastroliths, and fossils found with these stones have helped scientists better understand their feeding habits. The Netherlands is the only country in Europe where a life sentence truly means life imprisonment. Parole can only be granted by royal decree. In practice, these decisions are made only after an exceptional review process and with advice from the government and judicial authorities. For many years, it was extremely rare for someone serving a life sentence to be released. Today, however, there is a review mechanism to evaluate certain cases after a long period of incarceration, although the possibility of release remains very limited. There is a high school in China where students study from 6 in the morning until 11 at night to prepare for university entrance exams, achieving the highest scores on those exams. Genghis Khan's conquests caused such widespread devastation that the regrowth of vegetation across the former lands of his enemies led to a noticeable reduction in atmospheric carbon dioxide. It is estimated that the abandonment of vast agricultural areas allowed forests and grasslands to regenerate naturally, capturing part of the carbon in the atmosphere. Fat men's clubs were a popular phenomenon in the United States from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. Many of these social clubs limited membership to men who weighed more than 200 pounds. These clubs began to decline when obesity started being viewed as a negative trait rather than one associated with wealth and kindness. Actor Gerard Butler paid for bee venom injections on two separate occasions and ended up in the hospital both times. Butler himself said that he decided to try the treatment as part of an alternative therapy, but suffered a severe allergic reaction on both occasions. Bee venom therapy is still used in some places for therapeutic purposes, although its effectiveness for many conditions remains the subject of scientific debate. It can also cause serious reactions in sensitive individuals, so it is not recommended without proper medical supervision. In ancient Greece, men were required to go to the gym completely naked. These places were exclusively for men, and exercising without clothes was intended to promote appreciation of the male physique as a tribute to the gods. In fact, the word gymnasium comes from the Greek word gymnos, which means naked. In addition to training in wrestling, running, and throwing events, participants also received instruction in music, philosophy, and politics, making these places important centers of education and civic life. Australian Senator Sam Dastyari gave the kebab snack pack from King Kebab House a perfect 10 out of 10 rating and encouraged others to enjoy what he called a great Australian tradition of meat in a box. Snakes flick their tongues while swimming underwater. Although this behavior is best known on land, many species also do it underwater to collect dissolved chemical particles and carry them to the Jacobson's organ, located in the roof of the mouth. This ability helps them navigate, locate prey, and detect potential predators even in aquatic environments, where some snakes spend much of their lives hunting fish, amphibians, and small crustaceans. Vietnam has some unique monsters, one of which is the Ma Dai, a female ghost with long breasts that attacks victims at night by forcefully breastfeeding them until they lose consciousness. During the 1960s, prisoners in Saigon reported seeing a woman with long breasts forcibly nursing their fellow inmates. 287 years is the longest time a library book has ever been overdue. While writing a biography of Colonel Robert Walpole in 1956, Professor John Plum returned a history book to Sydney Sussex College in Cambridge after Walpole had checked it out around 1667. Schizophrenic hallucinations vary by culture, with Western hallucinations tending to be more violent and distressing. Some studies have found that patients in the United States describe voices that are more threatening, aggressive, or associated with losing control, while in countries such as India and Ghana, they may be perceived as familiar, playful, or even comforting. Researchers believe that religious beliefs, social relationships, and the way each society interprets the mind influence the content and experience of these voices. The Bajau are a group of people in Southeast Asia who evolved to have spleens that are 50% larger than normal. This allows them to spend 8 hours a day underwater catching octopuses by hand. William Lee Bergstrom was a gambler known for making what was, at the time, the largest casino wager in history, betting $777,000. He won and returned several years later. On his third wager, he risked $1 million, but lost. After that defeat, he went through a severe personal crisis that ended tragically. Winston Churchill attended Shakespeare plays and recited the lines along with the actors from the front row. Richard Burton, while playing Hamlet at the Old Vic Theatre, tried to throw Churchill off by changing the pace of his performance, but Churchill kept up with him the entire time. A squirrel's terminal velocity is so low that it can survive a fall from virtually any height. Its lightweight, large body surface relative to its mass, and ability to spread its legs and tail increase air resistance, greatly reducing its falling speed. As it approaches the ground, it can also position its body to land on its feet and better absorb the impact. Although this gives squirrels an extraordinary advantage over many other animals, a fall can still cause injuries depending on the landing surface or the circumstances of the impact. The Arniston, a sailing ship belonging to the British East India Company, was wrecked with the loss of 372 lives because the ship's owners refused to buy a marine chronometer. It costs more than 2.5 cents to produce a 1-cent coin, and more than 10 cents to produce a 5-cent coin. This situation has continued for several years because of rising metal, manufacturing, and distribution costs. As a result, the United States government has repeatedly debated changing the composition of these coins or even stopping the production of some of them. Even so, millions are still produced every year to meet the demands of commerce and everyday circulation. In 1807, Aaron Burr attempted to lead a secessionist movement in the United States. Although his exact goals were unclear, with speculation ranging from conquering Mexico to taking control of the Louisiana Purchase. He was charged, but was ultimately acquitted because of the lack of specific evidence regarding his final objective. Keanu Reeves has a group of fungicidal compounds named after him. This is because the scientists who isolated the compounds described their ability to kill mold as being comparable to the lethality of Reeves's movie characters. Ghana has 6 witch camps that are home to more than 1,000 women. The camps exist to provide women accused of witchcraft with a safe place to live without fearing they will be killed by their neighbors. The Rolex brand does not actually mean anything. It is a completely invented word that its founder believed would be easy to pronounce in any language. Hans Wilsdorf wanted a short, memorable name that could be read clearly on the face of a watch. Over time, that previously meaningless word became one of the most recognizable brands in the world, associated with luxury watchmaking, mechanical precision, and durable timepieces used in both expeditions and high-level sporting activities. When Apollo astronauts were out of radio contact with Earth, they actually had a tape recorder inside their spacecraft that recorded their private conversations. These transcripts remained classified until the 1970s because they contained detailed information about Apollo operations. The inventor of fettuccine Alfredo, Alfredo Di Lelio, created the famous pasta in 1908, mainly as a way to get his wife to eat. She had recently given birth to their first child and therefore had very little appetite. Multiple recent studies have demonstrated the harmful effects of maltodextrin on the intestinal environment, suggesting that this widely used food additive may play a role in the rapid increase in the incidence of chronic inflammatory disorders. It is commonly used as a thickener, stabilizer, or filler in processed foods, such as powdered drinks, snack foods, sauces, breakfast cereals, candy, and some dietary supplements. Although health authorities consider it safe within approved limits, many researchers continue to study its possible influence on the gut microbiome and the immune response. So, the subject remains an active area of scientific research. An aluminum Airstream was the only travel trailer in the United States to survive the Great Depression. Although MTV has filmed more than 101 concerts for its Unplugged series, fewer than 30 of them have been released as albums. The English term ass clown, used as an insult to describe a ridiculous or incompetent person, is attributed to the movie Office Space. It appears in a scene in which the character Michael Bolton refers to the singer of the same name as a talentless clown. The expression was improvised by actor David Herman shortly before filming and, thanks to the movie's cult following, eventually became part of everyday American English. Muhammad Ali's star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame is mounted on a wall instead of being placed on the ground. This is because Ali, a devout Muslim, did not want people walking on the name Muhammad. The current water speed record for the fastest water-powered vehicle was set 46 years ago at more than 317 miles per hour, and it is considered one of the most dangerous competitions in the world of sports. The ancient Mesopotamians practiced the use of a substitute king to protect the real king from bad omens. The real king would go into hiding while rituals were performed to transfer the danger to the substitute. At the end of the ritual, the substitute was executed. The copper skin of the Statue of Liberty is only 3/32 of an inch thick, which is approximately the thickness of 2 pennies stacked together. Despite being so thin, the copper sheets are supported by an internal framework designed by Gustave Eiffel, allowing them to expand and contract with temperature changes without cracking. Over the years, the copper developed the distinctive green patina that defines the statue today, a natural protective layer that shields the metal from corrosion and has helped preserve the monument for more than a century. Cardiovascular disease is strongly correlated with a specific crease in the earlobe. This crease, which runs between the tragus and the outer edge of the earlobe, is known as Frank's sign. The dilemma zone is the term for the area where you cannot safely stop for a yellow light or make it through the intersection before the light turns red. Traffic engineers take this phenomenon into account when setting the duration of yellow lights in order to reduce the risk of sudden braking and rear-end collisions. At some intersections, sensors are also used to detect vehicles approaching at a steady speed so the signal timing can be adjusted, reducing the likelihood that a driver will become trapped in that situation. Some women are born with a double uterus and actually have 2 menstrual periods each month, requiring 2 samples to be taken during pap smear testing, 1 from each cervix. This condition, known as uterus didelphys, is rare and develops before birth during the formation of the reproductive system. Many women have no symptoms and discover they have it during a gynecological exam or pregnancy. Although some may face a higher risk of certain pregnancy complications, many go on to have successful pregnancies with proper medical care. The Jevons paradox states that increasing the efficiency of resource use can lead to greater demand, often increasing consumption rather than reducing it. British economist William Stanley Jevons proposed this idea in the 19th century after observing that improvements in the efficiency of steam engines increased coal consumption instead of reducing it. Today, the concept is also applied to energy, fuel, and technology use, where greater efficiency can lower costs and encourage more frequent or widespread use of a resource. 29 bars in New Jersey were caught serving things such as isopropyl alcohol mixed with food coloring as Scotch whiskey and dirty water as liquor. The investigation was carried out by state authorities after receiving complaints and conducting undercover inspections at multiple establishments. In addition to replacing premium drinks with fraudulent mixtures, some bars refilled bottles of well-known brands with lower-quality liquids to increase their profits. The case led to fines, license suspensions, and stricter oversight of the authenticity of alcoholic beverages sold to the public. After 50 years, researchers identified the mysterious man on the cover of Led Zeppelin IV as Lot Long, a roofer who was born in Mere, Wiltshire in 1823 and died in 1893. At the time the photograph was taken, he was a widower living in a small cottage on Shaftesbury Road in Mere. The Dark Side of the Rainbow is the pairing of Pink Floyd's album The Dark Side of the Moon with the movie The Wizard of Oz. This creates numerous moments of apparent synchronization in which the film and the album seem to match up. However, the members of Pink Floyd have always denied any intention of connecting the two. Desiree Wilson is the only woman to have won a Formula One race of any kind. The South African driver claimed victory in 1980 at Brands Hatch during a British Aurora AFX Championship race held with Formula One cars. Although that event was not part of the official World Championship, her victory was historic. In recognition of her achievement, one of the grandstands at the British circuit was named after her. Norway has the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, with $1.6 trillion in assets, surpassing the sovereign wealth funds of China, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. As of 2019, it is more expensive to mint $1 coins than to keep $1 bills in circulation, because paper bills are being used less frequently and are therefore lasting longer. During the production of Thor: The Dark World, Marvel decided that the ether and the previously introduced key objects would become the Infinity Stones, giving each stone its own color. The red orb seen in Guardians of the Galaxy was changed to purple during post-production. In 1944, the Office of Strategic Services created a manual on sabotaging organizations. Among its recommendations were giving long speeches, referring every issue to committees, making committees as large as possible, and insisting on perfect work for relatively unimportant tasks. From 2014 to 2019, Flint, Michigan was exposed to contaminated drinking water, affecting 12,000 children. The crisis resulted in 79 lawsuits, 12 deaths, 4 firings, 4 resignations, and 1 criminal conviction in which the offender received only 1 year of probation. The Texas Triangle, made up of the metropolitan areas of Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin, is home to 68% of the state's 30.3 million residents. A 3,200-year-old tablet shows that the ancient Egyptians took attendance at work and even recorded absences. One reason given for missing work was that a wife or daughter was bleeding, referring to menstruation, because the men were needed at home to help with household chores during that time. Static apnea is a discipline in which a person holds their breath underwater for as long as possible without having to swim any distance. The all-time record for men is 11 minutes and 54 seconds, while the women's record is 9 minutes and 2 seconds. Wolfman Jack, featured in the 1973 movie American Graffiti, was a real radio disc jockey named Robert Smith who remained active for more than 3 decades. The movie's financial success provided him with a steady income for the rest of his life until his death at the age of 57 in 1995. Cockroach dust is one of the reasons so many children in disadvantaged neighborhoods develop asthma. Particles from cockroach droppings, saliva, and shed exoskeletons can accumulate in household dust and act as powerful allergens when inhaled. Long-term exposure, especially in homes with moisture problems or persistent infestations, has been linked to a higher risk of developing asthma or experiencing more frequent asthma attacks in people who already have the condition. As a result, improving housing conditions and controlling pests are among the recommended strategies for reducing this risk. Dark-skinned people with naturally blonde hair can be found in the islands of Melanesia. This trait is especially well known in the Solomon Islands and is not the result of recent mixing with European populations, but rather of a distinct genetic variant that arose independently. The hair usually develops that color during childhood and, in many cases, may darken slightly with age. Among private industry occupations with more than 20,000 workers and at least 4 reported deaths in 2021, tree trimmers had the highest rate of work-related fatalities in the United States. This represented a fatality rate 21 times higher than that of the average American occupation. When new Coke was introduced, Pepsi gave its employees a day off and ran full-page newspaper advertisements declaring victory in the cola wars. In Japan, there is a group of successful homemakers who trade in the stock market known as the Watanabe wives. They are so skilled at what they do that many traders use their investment activity as an indicator of which stocks are performing well. The I Have a Dream speech was a last-minute decision. Dr. King had planned to deliver a completely different speech until a legendary gospel singer standing behind the podium shouted for him to tell them about the dream. The average age of first-time authors is 42. Although many people imagine that writers publish their first books while they are very young, a large number make their debut only after accumulating years of professional and personal experience. Many spend decades refining their craft before finding a publisher or deciding to publish. Even so, the literary world includes many authors who achieved success for the first time at much older ages, proving that it is never too late to begin a writing career. New Jersey is the only state in America where it is illegal for drivers to pump their own gas. A Monmouth University poll in 2022 also found that 60% of New Jersey residents oppose a policy that would allow gas stations to become completely self-service. A Japanese man named Yasuo Takamatsu lost his wife in the 2011 earthquake and has continued searching for her body for more than 10 years, even completing more than 800 dives in the ocean in search of her. Cicadas can become infected by a fungus that produces psychoactive compounds similar to those found in certain hallucinogenic mushrooms, while also causing the back portion of their abdomen to fall off. Despite this severe infection, the insects continue flying and attempting to mate, helping spread the fungus's spores to other cicadas. This remarkable form of behavioral manipulation has attracted significant interest from scientists who study the evolution of parasites and the interactions between microorganisms and insects. In 2004, Eminem served as co-executive producer of Tupac's album Loyal to the Game, alongside Pac's mother, Afeni Shakur. Eminem expressed his gratitude by sending her a drawing of Tupac and a heartfelt letter telling her that Tupac had inspired his entire career and thanking her for the opportunities she had given him. A study in 2009 that randomly selected people with beards, mustaches, and clean-shaven faces found that people with mustaches earned 8.2% more money than those with beards and 4.3% more than clean-shaven men. However, they also spent 11% more money. The study was funded by the American Mustache Institute. On March 1, 1504, Christopher Columbus convinced the people of Jamaica to continue supplying him by threatening to take away the moon. One of the founding fathers of the United States, Benjamin Franklin, wrote an essay about flatulence. The text, titled Fart Proudly, was written around 1781 as a satire directed at a French scientific academy. In it, he humorously suggested that scientists should investigate ways to make flatulence smell better instead of devoting their efforts to matters that were less useful in everyday life. Some states in India pay police officers to maintain mustaches in order to appear more intimidating. In certain police departments, officers receive small financial incentives for keeping a well-groomed mustache because it has traditionally been associated with authority, respect, and leadership. The practice is not uniform across the country and depends on the rules of each state or agency. In many parts of India, the mustache also holds significant cultural value and has long been regarded as a symbol of prestige and personal pride. There is actually no evidence that Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla ever hated each other, despite the popular belief. Although they had professional disagreements and went their separate ways after briefly working together, historical records do not show the intense personal rivalry that is often portrayed. Much of that image comes from later accounts that exaggerated the so-called War of the Currents between direct current and alternating current. Tesla even publicly acknowledged Edison's talent and work ethic despite their technical and commercial differences. During World War II, an Allied prisoner of war in a German prison camp could write to Rolex and request a wristwatch without immediate payment. Rolex would send the watch and keep the bill until after the war. In 2023, a 45-year-old Belgian man named David Berton faked his own death, then showed up at his own funeral to teach his family a life lesson. According to reports, he was upset that his family had grown distant. Octopuses deliberately throw shells at one another. Researchers found that 66% of the throws were made by females, often in response to mating attempts. For a creature without thumbs, they had a success rate of 17%. In 2022, James Earl Jones officially retired from voicing Darth Vader, but he signed an agreement allowing Lucasfilm to use archival recordings and artificial intelligence to continue using his voice for the character. The chin is unique to humans, and we are not actually sure what its purpose is. No other primate has an equivalent bone structure with the same shape and prominence. Over the years, several hypotheses have been proposed, including that it helps strengthen the jaw, that it emerged as a result of changes in the face during evolution, or that it played a role in sexual selection by influencing facial appearance. So far, none of these explanations has been definitively accepted, and the origin of this feature remains an active area of scientific research. The small hook at the end of a tape measure is intentionally loose so that when you push it against a wall, it slides inward to compensate for the thickness of the hook itself. Spelling bees, competitions in which contestants must correctly spell words until only one person remains, are virtually non-existent outside the English language and are almost exclusively an American tradition. Fatal familial insomnia is an extremely rare brain disease that causes its victims to permanently lose the ability to sleep, ultimately resulting in death. It is an inherited disorder caused by a mutation in the PRNP gene that leads to the buildup of abnormal prion proteins in the brain. In addition to progressively worsening insomnia, patients develop balance problems, autonomic nervous system disorders, cognitive decline, and weight loss. There is currently no cure, and available treatments are only intended to relieve some symptoms and provide supportive care. In 1915, tipping was so unpopular that 6 states declared it illegal. These laws were introduced because many people believed the practice was undemocratic, encouraged inequality between customers and workers, and turned good service into an obligation tied to extra money. However, the bans did not last long because they were difficult to enforce and were eventually repealed. Over the following decades, tipping culture became firmly established across much of the United States, especially in restaurants and hotels. Originally, the Celsius scale was intended to work in reverse, with water boiling at 0 degrees and freezing at 100 degrees. That was the scale proposed by Swedish astronomer Anders Celsius in 1742. Shortly after his death, other scientists reversed the values to create the modern version, in which water freezes at 0 degrees and boils at 100 degrees under standard conditions. That change made the scale more practical for everyday use and eventually turned it into the most widely used temperature scale throughout much of the world. The vehicles on the Indiana Jones attraction at Disneyland cannot move in reverse. The final rolling boulder escape scene is created by tilting the ride vehicle's motion base backward while the walls accelerate past the riders. The Parker Solar Probe has become the fastest human-made object, traveling at 430,000 miles per hour. That speed allows it to make extremely close flybys of the sun, using its gravity to accelerate even more with each pass. The spacecraft is protected by a carbon heat shield that withstands temperatures of thousands of degrees on its outer surface while keeping its instruments at a safe temperature. Thanks to its measurements, scientists have obtained unprecedented data about the solar wind and the sun's outer atmosphere. Elmer McCurdy was an outlaw who died in Oklahoma in 1911. His body was discovered in 1976 by a member of a film crew at an amusement park. It had been mistaken for a wax mannequin. Near the site of the Trinity atomic bomb test, there was a dance camp for girls. The girls played in the white ash that fell from the sky. 10 of the 12 girls died before reaching the age of 40. The Batmobile is legally considered a character. When DC Comics sued a mechanic who built replicas of Batman's vehicle, The courts ruled that the Batmobile has distinctive physical and conceptual qualities that make it more than just a useful object or an ordinary car. The United States ranks third in food quality and safety, just behind Canada and Denmark. This ranking evaluates factors such as food safety controls, nutritional standards, food safety, and the quality of available protein sources. It does not necessarily measure how healthy the average person's diet is. In other words, a country may have a highly reliable system for producing and distributing food, even if its population does not always maintain healthy eating habits. A group of horses was trained to communicate whether they wanted a blanket. Every horse in the group successfully communicated that it wanted a blanket when it was cold and did not want one when it was warm. During the study, the animals learned to touch different symbols to express their preference, allowing researchers to evaluate their choices consistently. The results suggest that horses can learn to use simple signals to communicate needs related to their well-being. This type of research is also helping develop better methods for understanding animal behavior and improving the care of domestic animals. The French monarchy fell 5 times and was restored 4 times within the span of a single century. Between the French Revolution and the permanent establishment of the Third Republic, the country repeatedly alternated between kings, emperors, and republican governments. During that period, France was ruled by the Bourbon monarchy, the First French Empire, the Bourbon Restoration, the July monarchy, the Second French Empire, and several republics. This political instability made France one of the European countries with the greatest number of regime changes in such a short period. While writing the James Bond film You Only Live Twice in 1967, author Roald Dahl was given a formula for Bond girls. The first girl is killed by the enemy halfway through the story, preferably in Bond's arms. The second is an enemy whom Bond seduces and who also dies. And the third survives until the end of the movie. On average, a person passes gas about 14 times a day, which works out to approximately once every 1.5 hours. Most of that gas is made up of nitrogen, carbon dioxide, hydrogen, and methane, with only a small amount containing the compounds responsible for unpleasant odors. The frequency can vary considerably depending on diet, fiber intake, gut microbiota, and how much air is swallowed while eating or drinking. So, somewhat higher or lower numbers can also be considered normal. John Rock, one of the creators of the birth control pill, was a devout Catholic. In addition to being a gynecologist and fertility researcher, he devoted much of his career to the study of human reproduction and helped develop techniques that later contributed to infertility treatments. After the birth control pill was introduced, he publicly argued that its use could be compatible with Catholic doctrine, although that position was not accepted by the Church. His work had a lasting impact on both reproductive medicine and family planning. In 2001, a Yakuza boss named Tadamasa Goto donated $100,000 to the University of California, Los Angeles. In return, he received a liver transplant, allowing him to skip the waiting list. That same year, 186 people in the Los Angeles area died while waiting for a liver transplant. The elephant Jumbo was not named because of his size. Instead, the word jumbo, meaning exceptionally large, entered the English language because of Jumbo the elephant. He was so large and so famous that his name became synonymous with size. Post-war Japan is one of the main reasons why mecha anime emerged and became so popular, as many of these stories reflected the desire for reconstruction, technological progress, and society's relationship with machines after the Second World War. Pioneering series such as Mazinger Z and Mobile Suit Gundam transformed giant robots into symbols of hope, conflict, and responsibility. Over time, the genre evolved to explore themes such as war, scientific ethics, sacrifice, and the consequences of technological progress, becoming one of the most influential pillars of Japanese animation. If you are afraid of bridges, you can hire a service in which someone takes the wheel of your car and drives you across the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, a 4.3-mile span in Maryland that is known as one of the most frightening bridges in the world. This service has existed for years and is used by people who experience intense anxiety about driving across the bridge, especially during strong winds or severe weather. The bridge crosses the Chesapeake Bay at a great height and combines long, elevated spans with sweeping views of the water, features that many drivers find intimidating. Michael Bay worked for Lucasfilm as a teenager. When he filed the storyboards for Raiders of the Lost Ark, he thought the movie would be terrible. His opinion changed after seeing the finished film, and that experience set him on the path to becoming a filmmaker. Viggo Mortensen wore his Russian gangster makeup tattoos into a Russian restaurant while filming Eastern Promises. The Russian diners fell silent out of fear until Viggo identified himself and explained that the tattoos were for a movie. After that, he removed the tattoos at the end of every filming day. The Police Academy franchise has produced 4 movies with a 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. The final film, Mission to Moscow, earned only $126,247 against a budget of $10 million. Inspector Clouseau, the world's only known pink manta ray, was first discovered in 2015 off the coast of Australia and was named after the detective from the Pink Panther series. Only about 200 people had reached the summit of Mount Everest by 1987, while by 2013, it had been reached 6,871 times by 4,042 different people. One of the most common genetic mutations is polydactyly, in which a person is born with one or more extra fingers or toes, affecting approximately 1 out of every 1,000 newborns. It can occur on one or both hands or feet, and in many cases, is an inherited trait caused by genetic variants that influence limb development during pregnancy. When the extra digit affects function or causes discomfort, it is usually corrected with surgery during childhood, with excellent results in most cases. Bill Nye the Science Guy holds a patent for an improved ballet point shoe designed to provide better support for dancers' feet. Before becoming famous as a science educator, he worked as a mechanical engineer and developed the improvement with other inventors. The design was intended to distribute body weight more evenly and increase a dancer's stability, reducing some of the strain placed on the feet during performances. The patent highlights a lesser-known aspect of his career and his interest in applying engineering to solve practical problems. Among the 20 highest-grossing concert tours of all time, only U2 appears 3 times, earning $736 million in 2009, $390 million in 2017, and $389 million in 2005. Many spices contain significant levels of heavy metals, such as lead and arsenic, with no clear indicator of safety based on brand name, country of origin, or organic status. Researchers believe these contaminants can enter spices through the soil, irrigation water, dust, processing, or even during storage and transportation. Most people consume spices in small amounts, but health authorities recommend maintaining a varied diet and strengthening quality controls to reduce cumulative exposure to these contaminants. When Eminem presented the Marshall Mathers LP to record label executive Jimmy Iovine, he was unimpressed and said the album had no hit songs. In direct response, Eminem created the album's second single, The Way I Am, and came up with the piano melody during the flight home after leaving the Interscope office in California. The Chicago metropolitan area has more hot dog restaurants than McDonald's, Wendy's, and Burger King restaurants combined. These stands and specialty restaurants have been part of the city's culinary identity for more than a century, largely because of European immigration. The famous Chicago-style hot dog is traditionally served on a poppy seed bun and topped with mustard, onions, bright green relish, tomatoes, a pickle spear, sport peppers, and celery salt, with no ketchup. Many of these businesses are family-owned and have remained open for several generations. Adjusted for modern inflation, Gone with the Wind earned more than $4 billion at the box office, making it the highest-grossing movie of all time. Released in 1939, the film remained in theaters for decades through multiple re-releases, a practice that was very common before the era of home video and streaming platforms. The United States ranks second in the world for the total number of Spanish speakers, surpassing Spain. The growth of this population has been driven by both immigration and new generations born in the country. Spanish has a strong presence in education, the media, advertising, and public services in many cities. In addition, many businesses offer products and services in both English and Spanish because of the large Spanish-speaking population, making Spanish one of the most influential languages in the country. A group of people walked the entire length of the Great Wall of China in 508 days in 1984. That covered 13,170 miles. The expedition crossed mountains, deserts, plains, and numerous ruined sections that rarely receive visitors. California daughter syndrome is a phrase used in the medical profession to describe a situation in which an absent family member questions the care being given to a dying elderly patient, or insists that the medical team take aggressive measures to prolong the patient's life. There was once something called Victorian coffin torpedoes, which were explosive devices designed to fire lead balls if a coffin lid was opened after burial in order to discourage grave robbers. The Simpsons writer Brent Forrester attended Lollapalooza as research for the episode titled Homerpalooza. He had a terrible experience that inspired several jokes in the episode, including cameras being confiscated and thrown away, a freak show, and, at one point, a stranger asking him, "How's it going, undercover cop?" Keurig coffee pod system inventor John Sylvan sold his ownership stake in the product for $50,000 in 1997. In 1993, James Scott deliberately damaged a levee and caused a massive flood on the Mississippi River simply to delay his wife's return home so he could go partying. Stuart Little is not a mouse. He is a normal human boy in every respect, except that he stands just over 2 inches tall and looks exactly like a mouse. Singer Dionne Warwick, upset by the misogyny in rap lyrics, once organized a meeting with Snoop Dogg and Suge Knight at her home, where she demanded that they call her a bitch to her face. Snoop Dogg later said that he felt someone had been tougher than they were that day. Because tungsten and gold have nearly identical densities, counterfeit gold bars and coins made from tungsten cannot be identified using the standard density test. Instead, ultrasonic testing must be used. Samsung can remotely disable your television through a built-in TV block feature. When the television connects to the internet, it checks its serial number against a list on Samsung servers and disables the device if there is a match. It is used to help prevent the sale of stolen merchandise from unauthorized retailers. The plague doctor suits of the Middle Ages actually provided some protection during the bubonic plague. The waxed robes helped prevent fleas from clinging to the wearer's body. Although they were designed based on incorrect ideas about the cause of the disease, several of their features ended up providing partial protection against the parasites that carried the bacteria. In addition to the robe, the doctors wore gloves, boots, wide-brimmed hats, and a beaked mask filled with aromatic herbs. The outfit also reduced direct contact with patients and potentially contaminated materials. Ketchup is one of the oldest variations of the word that eventually evolved into ketchup. While ketchup now refers specifically to tomato sauce, ketchup originally described a much broader variety of sauces that were not necessarily tomato-based. Multiple studies have shown that heterosexual men behave differently when women are nearby, but in unexpected ways. For example, they are more likely to cross the street recklessly, wait until the last second to sprint for a bus, take greater risks while gambling, and volunteer or donate more. These effects are strongest among young, single men. Ed Catmull, co-founder of Pixar and former president of Walt Disney Animation Studios, who revolutionized three-dimensional computer graphics and developed the industry's standard method for animating curved surfaces, has the rare condition known as aphantasia, which is the complete inability to visualize mental images. According to the International Olympic Committee, gold and silver medals are required to contain at least 92.5% silver. The gold on gold medals is actually only a thin outer coating and consists of at least 6 grams of pure gold. Silver medals are made of pure silver, while bronze medals are 95% copper and 5% zinc. Unborn baby sharks swim between their mothers' 2 uteruses, searching for unfertilized eggs to eat. This behavior occurs in some species and provides them with an additional source of nourishment before birth. In certain sharks, such as the bull shark, the more developed embryos may even feed on smaller embryos, a phenomenon known as intrauterine cannibalism. Thanks to this strategy, the pups are born larger, stronger, and with a better chance of surviving from their very first days of life. Saint Clare of Assisi, who died in 1253, is the patron saint of television. This is because, according to tradition, when she was too ill to attend Mass, she was able to see and hear it on the wall of her room. KFC founder Colonel Sanders and his wife Claudia were unhappy with the changes made to KFC's recipe after they sold the company. As a result, in 1968, they opened the Claudia Sanders Dinner House restaurant. It was later the subject of a lawsuit by KFC's owners that was settled out of court. The founder of TGI Fridays opened the first location in Manhattan in 1966 because he was single and wanted to create a place to meet women, especially flight attendants and fashion models. TGI Fridays was also one of the first businesses to use promotions such as Ladies' Night. Harambe was 17 years old and had not even reached reproductive maturity when he was shot. Lamarcus Thompson, the father of the American roller coaster, invented the first roller coasters at Coney Island because he believed the world had become too sinful and needed a more wholesome form of entertainment. Traditional red velvet cake gets its signature red color and velvety texture from a chemical reaction between natural cocoa powder, acidic buttermilk, and baking soda. The original Bambi novel was actually an allegory about anti-Semitism. In 2004, two male chinstrap penguins named Roy and Silo formed a pair at New York City's Central Park Zoo after performing mating rituals. One of them attempted to incubate a rock, so a keeper eventually replaced it with a fertile egg. Roy and Silo later hatched and raised the chick, named Tango. Jeannie was a feral child who was kept tied up in her father's bathroom for most of her childhood and never developed the ability to speak. Despite making significant progress in social skills and nonverbal communication, Jeannie never learned to acquire language after her rescue. The theory of plate tectonics was not validated until the 1960s. Its acceptance became possible thanks to evidence gathered from studies of the ocean floor, such as seafloor spreading and the magnetic patterns preserved in volcanic rocks. These discoveries made it possible to explain phenomena that had long seemed unrelated, including the formation of mountains, earthquakes, volcanoes, and the movement of continents. Today, it is one of the fundamental pillars of modern geology. Little Richard once saw that his airplane engine was on fire and vowed that if the plane landed safely, he would give up the devil's music and become a minister. The plane landed, and he kept his promise for 5 years. Of the approximately 16 million Americans who served during World War II, about 119,550 are still alive. While filming Dirty Dancing, Patrick Swayze found Jennifer Grey to be very unprofessional. In one scene where Jennifer Grey could not stop laughing because she was ticklish, she raised her arm and he had to stroke her side. They filmed that take 20 times, and she laughed every single time. Before announcing the Mach 3 razor in the late 1990s, Gillette built plywood walls around the production lines at its Boston factory to keep it secret from many of its own employees. Most modern tea bags contain small amounts of plastic used for sealing or strengthening them, and some can release microplastics or nanoplastics during brewing. However, many brands now use biodegradable or plastic-free materials because of growing environmental concerns. For those who wish to avoid plastic entirely, an alternative is to brew loose-leaf tea or use tea bags made from plant fibers without plastic components. One man survived 2 separate bear attacks in a single day. After the first attack, in which he was bitten on the head and arms, he played dead until the bear lost interest. Despite the ordeal, he walked 3 miles to his truck, only to be attacked again by the same bear, and miraculously survived. The first vending machine was in Egypt and dispensed holy water. It was described by the engineer and inventor Hero of Alexandria in the 1st century after Christ, and worked by using a coin that, when it fell onto a lever, opened a valve for a few moments to release a measured amount of water. When the coin slipped off the lever, the valve closed automatically, preventing any one person from taking more than the allotted amount and allowing the water to be distributed more fairly among visitors to the temple. Copycat was the first cloned pet, a cat born in late 2001. Throughout her life, she was a completely normal cat with no health complications. In fact, she even had 4 kittens. There is a roadside attraction in Plains, Georgia called the Jimmy Carter Peanut Statue. It depicts a giant smiling peanut modeled after Carter's smile and was built in 1976 to support his presidential campaign. Jimmy Carter himself hates it. 4% of people have never had a headache. Studies suggest that this is an uncommon group whose low susceptibility may be related to genetic, neurological, or environmental factors that are still not fully understood. By contrast, headaches are among the most common medical complaints in the world, and the vast majority of people will experience at least one during their lifetime. Researchers continue studying these differences to better understand the mechanisms that trigger pain. A man named Sam White, a Civil War collector from Virginia, died in 2008 when a 140-year-old high-explosive cannonball he was restoring detonated in the driveway of his home. The explosion was powerful enough to hurl shrapnel up to a quarter of a mile away. There were 18 more cannonballs in his driveway at the time. There is no federal law requiring a private business or organization to accept paper money or coins. In the United States, although cash is legal tender for paying debts, Businesses may establish their own payment methods in advance as long as they comply with applicable state or local laws. For that reason, some businesses operate exclusively with credit cards or digital payments. However, several cities and states have passed laws requiring certain businesses to accept cash, so they do not exclude people who lack access to banking services. Flamma, one of the most successful gladiators of the Roman Empire, was granted his freedom 4 times because of his exceptional skill and bravery. But he turned it down every time and chose to remain a gladiator instead. He fought 34 times, won 21 of those matches, fought to a draw 9 times, and received a pardon 4 times. There is a form of Greek sculpture called a herm that consists of a head mounted on an uncarved pillar that includes male genitalia. In the 1920s, doctors gave a man 1 year to live unless he moved to a warmer climate. He built a house in Bartow, Florida, with many unique features and designs, and he lived until the 1970s. It has become known as the Wonder House and later became a local tourist attraction. In 2006, the movie Cars earned $462 million at the box office, a relatively modest result for a Pixar film. However, it generated $8 billion in merchandise sales from that movie in just 5 years. In the early 1950s, many elementary school students in Lake County, Indiana, and throughout Utah were tattooed with their blood type in case a nuclear war broke out. Vending machines are deadlier than sharks because they sometimes fall on people. In medieval Europe, there was a sport known as rat baiting. Spectators gathered in public squares to watch trained dogs compete to catch and kill rats released into an arena. Betting on the outcome of these brutal contests was common. In 2023, about 10% of Anguilla's gross domestic product came from registration fees for .ai domain names, which is the island's official country code domain. The boom in artificial intelligence led to a sharp increase in demand for these internet addresses from technology companies around the world. The resulting revenue has allowed the government to invest more in infrastructure, healthcare, and education, making the country's internet domain one of its most valuable sources of income. The same is true for the .tv domain, which many people mistakenly believe stands for television, when, in fact, it belongs to the island nation of Tuvalu, which earns substantial revenue from people registering .tv websites such as twitch.tv. If you step onto a scale at the North Pole and weigh 200 pounds, you would weigh 198 pounds in northern Brazil, near the equator, because of Earth's rotation. At the equator, the planet's rotation creates a slightly greater centrifugal force that reduces the apparent weight of objects. In addition, Earth is not a perfect sphere, but is slightly flattened at the poles and bulges at the equator, placing you slightly farther from the planet's center. The combination of these two factors causes a person to weigh slightly less near the equator than at the poles. Before Ford discontinued the Fiesta, the company made more profit from licensing the model to Lego than from the compact car itself. Automakers often generate additional revenue by licensing their vehicles for toys, video games, and other products. But in the case of the Fiesta, that source of income became especially profitable because of the vehicle's slim profit margins. Jerry Seinfeld turned down $5 million per episode, the equivalent of nearly $10 million today, to make a 10th season of Seinfeld. Having sex twice a week reduces a man's risk of a heart attack by 50%. This is according to a study from 2010 published in the American Journal of Cardiology that followed men between the ages of 40 and 70 over a period of 16 years. Second breakfast is a real meal and not an invention of Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings. It is a traditional meal in parts of Central Europe, especially Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and Bavaria, and typically consists of meats and pastries served with coffee. It is usually eaten in the middle of the morning, between breakfast and lunch, to restore energy during the day. Depending on the region and family traditions, it may also include bread, cold cuts, cheese, eggs, fruit, or yogurt. Although the ingredients vary, this meal remains an everyday tradition for many people and is part of the culinary culture of those regions. Aircraft from the 100th Bomb Group of the United States Army Air Forces were sent on an Allied bombing raid over Münster, Germany in 1943. 5 were forced to turn back before reaching Münster, and of the 13 that continued, only 1 aircraft returned to base. The group became known as the Bloody 100th. The city of Lincoln, Illinois was named after Abraham Lincoln 8 years before he became president. He was the attorney for the Chicago and Mississippi Railroad that led to the city's founding. Ari Nagel, known as the Sperminator, has fathered more than 100 children. He does not turn away any woman and does not charge for his services, although he pays child support for several of his children. 3 documentaries have been made about him, including The Baby Daddy from 2022 and Sperm World from 2024, both of which feature his contributions. Honey Nut Cheerios has not actually contained nuts since 2006. The company removed the almond extract that had previously been used in order to reduce the risk of allergic reactions and simplify the product's formulation. Even so, the brand name was retained because it was already widely recognized by consumers. Today, the cereal's distinctive flavor comes from a combination of honey, natural flavorings, and other ingredients designed to preserve a similar taste. Steamed hamburgers are a real regional specialty in central Connecticut. They're cooked by steaming them in special metal containers instead of grilling or frying them, allowing the meat to retain much of its natural juices and develop a very tender texture. The cheese is also typically heated separately until it is completely melted before being placed on the meat. This style of hamburger has existed for more than a century and remains a beloved specialty at a handful of traditional restaurants in the region. Doug Hegdel was captured during the Vietnam War and, while pretending to be unintelligent, managed to sabotage enemy trucks, memorize information about approximately 250 fellow prisoners, and, after being released, took part in the Paris peace talks, ultimately helping secure the release of those prisoners. New York mobster Joe Gallo was a watercolor painter diagnosed with schizophrenia and an avid reader of classical literature who walked his pet lion through the city. He kidnapped his own bosses, sparked 2 gang wars, and was murdered on his birthday in 1972. Bob Dylan even wrote a song about him. The United States government loses $110 million each year from minting 1-cent coins. It is also one of the few governments remaining in the developed world that continues to do so. None of the people who were filmed or photographed falling from the Twin Towers on September 11th have ever been officially identified. The collapse of the towers before their remains could be recovered from the scene made identification through DNA analysis impossible. The oldest humanoid archaeological discovery in Japan dates back 22,000 years. It contained the fossils of 2 males and between 3 and 7 females. They are believed to have been speared, eaten, and then thrown into the crevice. To reduce the immediate financial burden of Terminator 2, Judgment Day's production costs, Carolco Pictures paid most of Arnold Schwarzenegger's salary with a Gulfstream 3 jet valued at $12.75 million. 50 years after the last Apollo mission in 1972, only 4 of the 12 men who walked on the moon are still alive: Charlie Duke, Buzz Aldrin, Dave Scott, and Harrison Schmitt. After leaving NASA, Duke embraced the creationist belief that everything in the universe was created by God. The rivalry between the neighboring cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul was once so intense that during the 1890 United States Census, each city began arresting or kidnapping the other's census takers in an effort to slow its rival's population growth. More than 60 towns were considered as filming locations for the movie Groundhog Day. Although it was relatively remote, Woodstock, Illinois was chosen because it offered the timeless quality the filmmakers were looking for. The town even came with a large pothole for Phil to step into. There is something called a hepatic pregnancy, in which the fertilized egg implants in the liver. It is one of the rarest forms of ectopic pregnancy ever documented, with only a handful of cases described in the medical literature. Because the liver contains a large number of blood vessels, it carries an extremely high risk of severe hemorrhaging and requires immediate medical attention. In most cases, the diagnosis is made through medical imaging, and treatment usually involves specialized surgery. A boy named Jerry Parr was inspired to join the United States Secret Service after watching the movie Code of the Secret Service, in which Ronald Reagan played a Secret Service agent. Jerry grew up, joined the agency, and saved Reagan, then the President of the United States, from being assassinated. A skydiver once suffered a seizure while 9,000 feet in the air and was saved by his instructor, who pulled his ripcord. In 1991, Bryan Adams's chart-topping song Everything I Do was ruled not Canadian enough by the CRTC, preventing it from receiving more frequent airplay on Canadian radio stations. This happened even though Adams had been named a member of the Order of Canada in 1990. Many English words and phrases are borrowings from Chinese merchants who interacted with British sailors, such as chop chop. Long time no see. No pain, no gain. No can do, and look, see? Children born in the early and mid-1980s are called the DuckTales generation in Hungary because their first encounter with politics came in 1993. That was when an episode of DuckTales they had been waiting all week to watch was interrupted by the announcement of the Prime Minister's death. Treadmills were originally used as punishment devices for prisoners sentenced to hard labor in British prisons. They were banned in 1902 after being considered cruel and inhumane. John Quincy Adams became partially blind after looking directly at a solar eclipse in 1791. Julia Louis-Dreyfus is the actress with the most Emmy Awards and Screen Actors Guild Awards. In 1903, the New York Times predicted it would take humans between 1 million and 10 million years to perfect a flying machine. The Wright brothers accomplished it 69 days later. Larry Bird once played a game mostly with his left hand because he wanted to save his right hand for the next game against the Lakers. In 1975, Hugh Hefner lent his private airplane, the Big Bunny, to Operation Baby Lift to help transport 41 orphaned Vietnamese children to New York. Bill Nye quit his job at Boeing to become a live comedian after winning a Steve Martin lookalike contest in 1978. The red phone that connected Washington and Moscow was neither red nor a telephone. It was a teletype when the system began in 1963, changed to fax in 1986, and has used secure email since 2008. The Clacton spear is the remains of a wooden spear that was made about 400,000 years ago, making it older than the evolution of modern humans and the oldest known example of a wooden tool created by a hominin. Lei Tai is an ancient Chinese form of combat and entertainment in which a local champion builds a platform in the town square and invites anyone to knock him off the stage using an unarmed martial art. The winner becomes the new owner of the platform and then issues a similar challenge. Despite not having played since 2018, Major League Baseball player Andrew Toles has remained under contract with the Los Angeles Dodgers so he can continue receiving mental health treatment for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Beyoncé is named after her mother's maiden name, which is also Beyoncé. There have been multiple AI winters, which are periods of reduced funding and interest in the field that follow periods of exaggerated expectations about the claimed capabilities of artificial intelligence. The mitochondria in our cells, which generate energy, are ancient bacteria that formed a symbiotic relationship with other single-celled organisms about 1.5 billion years ago. This process is known as symbiogenesis. In 1969, Ted Conrad embezzled $215,000 from a bank in Ohio and then avoided capture for the remaining 51 years of his life. He became Thomas Randell and settled in Massachusetts. It was not until his deathbed confession in 2021 that he told his wife and daughter who he really was and what he had done. There is an annual lying competition in England called the World's Biggest Liar Contest, held in Cumbria. Contestants compete to tell the most convincing lie in 5 minutes. Politicians and lawyers are not allowed to participate because of their reputed skill at deception. When Jimi Hendrix and his band walked into a bar in England, the bartender told them they were not welcome, saying they could not serve their kind there. Hendrix thought it was because he was African American, but in reality, it was because they were mistaken for circus clowns. At Pendleton Correctional Facility, inmates with good behavior are allowed to have cats. These feline companions are believed to help control the inmates' tempers and are considered highly beneficial to the prisoners. Arlington, Texas is the largest city in the United States without public transportation, despite having a population of 390,000 people and several major sports stadiums. It does not have a single bus or rail line. The shape of a person's face can correspond to their height, meaning that taller people tend to have longer faces. Various anthropometric studies have found relationships between height, skull size, and certain facial proportions, although these patterns do not apply equally to every individual. The last Grand Duchess of Russia died in 1960 in a small apartment in Toronto. While Weird Al was developing his television show, Seth MacFarlane pitched him a short animated segment that Al decided not to include. That segment was later developed into the television series Family Guy. Scandinavians during the Viking Age believed that every person possessed a kind of luck spirit that could leave the body under extreme circumstances. The English expression that someone has run out of luck is actually an adaptation of a Norse proverb, but when the Norse said it, they meant it literally. the last prince of the Ottoman Empire, lived in a rent-controlled apartment in New York City. Every parachute opened successfully during the worst skydiving accident in United States history. All 16 deaths occurred because the skydivers were instructed to jump over water instead of land, and they drowned. A pregnant woman can become pregnant again while already pregnant. It is possible for a pregnant woman to release another egg that is fertilized independently, resulting in two fetuses of different ages developing in the womb. Until 2019, male members of the United States Marine Corps were not allowed to carry umbrellas while wearing their uniforms. A man named Liang Shi has failed China's college entrance examination 27 consecutive times as of the age of 56. He first took the exam in 1983. China was the only nation at the Paris Peace Conference that refused to sign the Treaty of Versailles. A version of the Golden Rule can be found in a papyrus from the late period of ancient Egypt. It states, "What you hate to have done to you, do not do to another." This principle appeared many centuries before the modern era and has parallels in numerous philosophical and religious traditions from different parts of the world. Its presence in cultures that had no direct contact with one another has led many historians to regard it as one of humanity's most universal ethical principles, based on reciprocity and respect for others. There is a Chinese poem titled "The Lion-Eating Poet in the Stone Den," consisting of 92 words, all of which are pronounced shu. The poem becomes understandable because Chinese is a tonal language in which the same syllable can be pronounced with many different tones. It is said that the poem makes more sense in Cantonese than in Mandarin. Following the solar eclipse on August 11, 1999, the British medical journal BMJ reported only 14 cases of eye damage caused by improper eclipse viewing. That number was far lower than initially feared. However, in one of the most serious cases, the patient had looked directly at the sun without eye protection for 20 minutes. There is a criminal defense known as the defense of necessity, in which the defendant argues that committing the crime was necessary to prevent a greater harm from occurring. This legal principle exists, with variations depending on the country, and is typically applied in exceptional situations, such as breaking into a building to escape a fire or taking a vehicle to rush someone with a life-threatening injury to the hospital. To succeed, it generally must be shown that there was no reasonable alternative and that the harm avoided was clearly more serious than the offense that was committed. The organization of the periodic table of the elements was created by Russian chemist Dmitry Mendeleev after he had a dream in which the elements arranged themselves according to their atomic weights and chemical properties. Celebrity chef Jamie Oliver named his children Poppy Honey Rosie, Daisy Boo Pamela, Petal Blossom Rainbow, Buddy Bear Maurice, and River Rocket Blue Dallas. George Washington had to borrow money to travel to New York City for his presidential inauguration. Despite owning 60,000 acres and 300 enslaved people, he had very little cash on hand, and part of the reason he accepted the office was the salary. Much of his wealth was tied up in land, crops, and property that could not be quickly converted into cash. As president, he received a substantial annual salary for the time, although he insisted that the office should maintain its dignity and refused to rely on private donations. Fox used clips from YouTube gaming videos in an episode of Family Guy. After the episode aired, Fox's automated content detection system mistakenly flagged the original videos with copyright claims, and the videos were taken down. They were later restored after the mistake was identified. Belphegor's prime is a 1 followed by 13 zeros, 666, another 13 zeros, and a 1 at the end. It is 31 digits long and is also a palindromic prime discovered by mathematician Harvey Dubner. Belphegor's prime is named after the demon of invention. In Rastafarianism, Zion represents a utopian place of unity, peace, and freedom, in contrast to Babylon, which represents the oppressive and exploitative system of the modern material world, as well as a place of evil. The largest known prime number contains 41,024,320 digits, and the search for an even larger prime number continues. The current record belongs to a Mersenne prime discovered through the collaborative GIMPS project, in which thousands of volunteers donate computing time from their computers to perform the calculations. Mathematicians know there will never be a definitive largest prime number because it has been proven that infinitely many prime numbers exist. For that reason, the search is focused on finding ever larger, record-breaking primes. 12 years before taking his fans to court for sharing his music, Metallica released an extended play titled The $5.98 Extended Play to prevent its record label and music stores from overcharging fans. The album included a sticker that read, "Don't pay more," taking direct aim at the music industry's profit margins. At the height of Japan's economic boom in the 1980s, the land beneath the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was said to be worth as much as the entire state of California, and Japan's real estate market was worth as much as 4 times the value of the real estate market in the United States. The shaggy defense is a legal strategy in which a person denies an accusation by simply saying, "It wasn't me," despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The name comes from the popular song "It Wasn't Me" by Jamaican singer Shaggy, in which the main character repeatedly responds with that phrase to various accusations. Although the term is frequently used in the media, political commentary, and online debates, it is not a recognized legal doctrine or a formal legal strategy within the legal system. In 1945, 2 years before Jackie Robinson broke baseball's color barrier, the Boston Red Sox staged a sham tryout for him and other African-American players. The Red Sox management shouted racial slurs from the stands and humiliated the players. The Red Sox would eventually become the last Major League Baseball team to integrate racially in 1959. Sloths take an entire month to digest a single leaf and defecate only once a week. Their digestive system is extremely slow because leaves contain very few calories and are difficult to break down. To get the most out of every meal, these animals maintain a very low metabolism and spend most of their time resting to conserve energy. When they climb down from the trees to defecate, they usually do so near the base of the same tree, a behavior that scientists are still studying. Harrison Ford and Sylvester Stallone are the only 2 actors in history to have starred in #1 box office movies across 6 consecutive decades. 83% of console gaming revenue in 2023 was digital, representing $44.16 billion of the global total of $53.2 billion. King Ranch, the largest ranch in the United States, is larger than Rhode Island and Luxembourg combined. Located in South Texas, it covers more than 1,274 square miles and was founded in the 19th century. In addition to cattle ranching, the ranch has played an important role in wildlife conservation, agricultural research, and the breeding of purebred horses. Its vast expanse includes grasslands, wetlands, and habitats that are home to hundreds of species of birds, mammals, and reptiles. There are plastic-eating bacteria that can turn plastic waste into silk. Scientists used bacteria that naturally consume polyethylene and then genetically engineered the microbe so it could also produce a silk-like material. A young woman's head once swelled from its usual circumference of 22 inches to nearly 25 inches, and the shape of her face changed after she used hair dye. This happened because the dye contained a chemical called PPD, which can cause severe allergic reactions in certain people. Contrary to popular belief, Americans actually have worse dental health than the British. Various studies have found that the difference depends on the indicator being used, since access to care, treatment costs, and preventive habits vary between the two countries. In the United Kingdom, regular dental checkups are common through the public health system, while in the United States, many people delay visits to the dentist because of the cost. 5 parrots at the Lincolnshire Wildlife Park in Friskney were removed from public display after they began swearing at visitors. The birds had learned those words from people before arriving at the park and ended up repeating them very frequently. The keepers explained that African gray parrots have an extraordinary ability to mimic the human voice and are especially likely to repeat expressions that provoke strong reactions, such as laughter or surprise, because that attention reinforces the behavior. The eternal flame at the John F. Kennedy Memorial was accidentally extinguished 15 days after it was lit in 1963 because some children poured holy water on it. It went out again in 1967 when the transformer powering the spark igniter flooded and short-circuited during a rainstorm. Veterinarians can perform surgery on fish. For longer procedures, they keep the gills moist while the surgery is performed outside the water. In many operations, they also continuously pump water containing dissolved anesthetic through the fish's mouth and over its gills, allowing it to keep breathing while remaining motionless. These procedures include removing tumors, repairing fractures, removing fish hooks, and treating infections, and they are becoming increasingly common in both public aquariums and valuable ornamental fish. Unlike the way they are portrayed in Looney Tunes cartoons, coyotes greatly outperform roadrunners in real life. Coyotes can reach speeds of up to 43 miles per hour, while roadrunners top out at only 20 miles per hour, less than half that speed. Active listening means listening with the intention of fully understanding the other person, rather than listening in order to respond. However, it was criticized in John Gottman's book, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, for having limited usefulness. Craigslist generates more than $600 million in annual revenue with only 50 employees. It was never said that the sirens in Homer's Odyssey were actually beautiful or even mermaids. Instead, they were strange creatures with human faces and bird bodies that lured men to their deaths by promising them wisdom and knowledge of the future. One reason many animal shelters are filled with huskies is the television series Game of Thrones. Many people wanted their own direwolf in real life, but later abandoned the dogs after realizing how much work they require. Andres Serrano once faced intense controversy over his 1987 work titled Piss Christ, which depicts a crucifix of Jesus submerged in urine. However, in 2023, Pope Francis blessed Serrano and gave him a thumbs-up gesture of approval. Mike Tyson filed for bankruptcy in 2003. This happened despite having earned $400 million from boxing, with examples of extravagant spending including $6.3 million on luxury cars and $580,000 on his 30th birthday. He has since improved his financial situation and now earns more than $900,000 a month from his various business ventures. Jeffrey Hunter, the original Captain Christopher Pike, died in 1969 without ever knowing how popular Star Trek would become or how iconic he would be. The creators of Game of Thrones, David Benioff and Dan Weiss, were contractually guaranteed producer credits on every Game of Thrones spin-off series. However, they turned down producer credits on House of the Dragon and the free money that came with them because they were not involved in the series and felt the stress was not worth it. Vatican City consumes more wine per capita than any other country. The Crypt of Civilization is a time capsule chamber that was sealed in 1940 and will not be opened until the year 8113. Boeing offered to install solid rocket boosters on its early 727-200 commercial aircraft during the 1960s and 1970s. They were intended to provide emergency thrust in the event of an engine failure during takeoff at high-altitude airports. Only 12 727s ever had them, all of them operated by Mexicana de Aviación for use in Mexico City. Voltaire was known for drinking up to 40 cups of coffee a day at a cafe in Paris. He drank his coffee mixed with chocolate. His contemporaries noted that he spent long days reading, writing, and engaging in intellectual debate, almost always accompanied by this drink. He was one of the most influential writers and philosophers of the Enlightenment and the author of numerous works on politics, religion, and freedom of speech. DreamWorks owns the film rights to Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches. This means that using his original speeches extensively in a movie or audiovisual production generally requires obtaining a license from the rights holders. However, this protection does not prevent historians, journalists, or writers from quoting brief excerpts for informational or educational purposes when permitted by law. One of the most tightly protected speeches has been "I Have a Dream," whose rights have been the subject of agreements and legal disputes for decades. French writer Guy de Maupassant ate lunch at the base of the Eiffel Tower almost every day because he hated its design so much that it was the only place in Paris where he could not see it. The San Diego Chargers were required to take anabolic steroids 3 times a day during training camp. Not surprisingly, they led the league in nearly every offensive and defensive category and won the AFL championship by a score of 51-10. The plane crash in the television series Breaking Bad was inspired by the real Cerritos mid-air collision in 1986, and the subordinate air traffic controller involved was actually named Walter White. During World War II, all United States currency in Hawaii was replaced with a special version stamped with Hawaii on both the front and back to ensure it would be worthless if it fell into Japanese hands during an invasion. In Kenya, a man once assumed the identity of a lawyer named Brian Mwenda and won dozens of cases despite having no legal training, but he was eventually arrested for identity theft after his deception was uncovered. During the development of the first Hitman game, the developers at the Danish video game company IO Interactive kept Agent 47 bald because, at the time, it was too difficult for them to create hair for the main character. The Romans used war pigs because their squeals frightened war elephants, causing them to panic and trample their own armies. Babe Ruth repeatedly cheated on his wives throughout his baseball career. A detective hired by the New York Yankees to follow him one night in Chicago reported that Ruth had been with 6 women. A 20-year-old Belgian man died after eating 5-day-old pasta because it was contaminated with the bacterium Bacillus cereus. The food had been left at room temperature for an extended period, allowing the bacteria to produce heat-resistant toxins that are not destroyed by reheating the food. Stockton Metropolitan Airport in California once attempted to change its name to San Francisco Stockton Regional Airport, despite being 83 miles from San Francisco. Pop artist Andy Warhol was a devout Catholic who attended Mass every Sunday, regularly volunteered at soup kitchens, and converted at least one person to Christianity. The United States has 4 of the world's 5 largest air forces. Each military branch is ranked individually among the top 5 in the world. During the First World War in Great Britain, the sale of fresh bread was banned, and all bread had to be sold stale so people would eat less of it. Michael Crichton, the author of the 1990 novel Jurassic Park, was a workaholic who followed what he called a structured approach of ritual self-denial. While writing a book, he woke up earlier every day. At one point, Crichton went to bed at 10 at night and woke up at 2 in the morning. France once sent a cat into space in 1963. Félicette was a stray cat from the streets of Paris and one of the 14 cats trained for spaceflight. She even survived the mission. One reason women are less likely to receive cardiopulmonary resuscitation than men is that people fear touching a woman's chest inappropriately while performing the procedure. To help address this problem, a training vest with breasts was developed to place on flat-chested CPR training mannequins. The bloody sweat of Jesus described in the Gospel of Luke is actually a real phenomenon that can occur when a person experiences extreme stress. It is known as hematidrosis. Sully Sullenberger lost a library book when he landed U.S. Airways Flight 1549 on the Hudson River. He later called the library to inform them that the book was about professional ethics. In the movie Speed 2: Cruise Control, the scene in which the ship crashes into the island was filmed using a real, non-computer-generated ship crashing into a real island, and it was the most expensive stunt ever filmed at the time, costing $25 million in 1997. Humans, orcas, narwhals, and some other species of toothed whales are the only known mammal species that go through menopause. These also include belugas, pilot whales, and false killer whales. In several of these species, older females continue to play a vital role within the group by sharing knowledge about migration routes, feeding grounds, and ways to cope with times of scarcity. Scientists believe that this accumulated experience can increase the survival chances of their relatives and contribute to the group's long-term success. Robin Williams secretly dressed as Santa Claus for sick children and thanked medical staff with tears in his eyes. The game of Go is so complex that the number of legal board positions, estimated at approximately 2.1 times 10 to the 170th power, is far greater than the number of atoms in the observable universe. A 2020 analysis found that approximately 1.8% of physicians were responsible for half of the approximately $83.3 billion paid in medical malpractice claims reported to the National Practitioner Databank over a period of 25 years. The word "riz" was Oxford's Word of the Year in 2023. There was a preschool hysteria during the 1980s in which people became convinced that rituals were being performed on children because of the accusations of one woman, leading to an investigation that pressured children into confessing to things that were not true. If you tune your radio to 91.9 FM while driving through one city block in Montclair, New Jersey, you can hear a looped recording of Boyz II Men's song, "I'll Make Love to You," which has been continuously broadcasting for 13 years. A man named Robert Citron, despite dropping out of college and having the math skills of a 7th-grade student, rose to become the treasurer and tax collector of Orange County, which he later drove into bankruptcy. Drug cartels are the 5th largest employer in Mexico, with more than 175,000 members. The Pauli effect is the supposed tendency for technical equipment to mysteriously break down in the presence of certain people. The effect is named after Austrian theoretical physicist Wolfgang Pauli, whose presence was associated with spontaneous mechanical failures throughout his career. Batman was created at almost the same time as Black Bat, a pulp fiction hero who was so similar that the publishers considered suing each other. They eventually reached an agreement under which Black Bat would not appear in comic books, and in return, Batman would not appear in pulp magazines. There are no laundry facilities on the International Space Station. Astronauts typically wear their clothes until they become too dirty, then throw them away. The clothing is loaded onto a cargo spacecraft that eventually burns up upon re-entering Earth's atmosphere. Johnny Cash was born as J.R. Cash because his parents compromised on his name. His mother wanted John and his father wanted Ray. When he joined the Air Force, he was not allowed to use only initials, so he adopted the name John R. Cash. He began using Johnny Cash after signing with Sun Records. John Candy was supposedly the most frequently canceled potential host of Saturday Night Live, having been asked to host many times only for the show's staff to change their plans at the last minute. In 1996, a gorilla carried a 3-year-old boy to safety after he fell into its enclosure. The 50 in the title of the 1960s television series Hawaii Five-0 refers to Hawaii being the 50th state of the United States. 14 artists contributed backing vocals to Kanye West's song All of the Lights. Lightsaber dueling became an official sport in France beginning in 2019, making it the first country in the world to recognize it as such. A lost X-Wing starfighter model, used in the climactic battle scene of Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, sold for $3.1 million, making it the most expensive screen-used Star Wars prop ever sold. It is one of only 4 known close-up models that were built. The man who physically wrote the Constitution, Gouverneur Morris, died from an infection caused by a wound he suffered after using a piece of whalebone as a probe in an attempt to clear a blockage in his urinary tract. Professional mourners really exist. They are people hired to cry and wail at funerals, expressing deep grief as though they were personally affected by the loss. In 1940, the United Kingdom proposed a political union with France so the two nations would be regarded as a single country during the Second World War. The proposal included shared citizenship, resources, defense, and government policies. Had it been made just a few days earlier, historians believe it might have been seriously considered. In the original script for Rocky V, Rocky is so badly beaten after his fight with Tommy that he rests his head in Adrian's lap on the way to the hospital and dies. Stallone reportedly cried while writing that scene. Tim Curry was one of the leading choices to play the Joker in the 1989 Batman movie, but the role went to Jack Nicholson instead. Curry later voiced the Joker in the 1992 animated series, but he was quickly replaced by Mark Hamill because his voice was considered too frightening. AMD Chief Executive Officer Lisa Su is the cousin of NVIDIA Chief Executive Officer and co-founder Jensen Huang. A professional soccer team in Wales included a bizarre and completely inappropriate clause involving a sheep in a player's contract. A study from 2020 found evidence that arrows fired from medieval longbows could cause injuries similar to those inflicted by modern firearms. One example was the analysis of a skull that revealed an arrow had caused devastating entry and exit wounds similar to those produced by modern bullets. In Iceland, you can revoke your former spouse's right to use your last name. Icelandic law allows a person to request that a former spouse stop using a surname acquired through marriage after a separation or divorce, especially when there is no legitimate reason to keep it. The country's naming system is unique because most Icelanders use patronymics or matronymics based on one of their parents' first names instead of family surnames passed down through generations. A baseball stadium organist was ejected from a game after playing the song Three Blind Mice in response to what he believed was a bad call by the umpire. In 2008, an orca named Tahlequah, known to researchers as J35, mourned her dead calf by carrying it across the ocean for 17 days in more than 1,000 miles, refusing to let it sink. The last British Empire soldier to die in the First World War was Canadian George Lawrence Price, who was killed 2 minutes before the war ended. In the year 2000, Norm Macdonald nearly won $1 million for Paul Newman's children's charity, but host Regis Philbin convinced him not to answer the question, so he walked away with only $500,000. The slogan of Kazakhstan's tourism board is, "Kazakhstan, very nice." Radio station KARW once organized a massive Beatles bonfire to protest John Lennon's comment that the band was more popular than Jesus, only for lightning to strike its transmission tower the very next day, temporarily knocking the station off the air. Steel was a 1997 movie starring Shaquille O'Neal as DC Comics' armored vigilante Steel. The film was a box office failure, setting a record for the biggest second weekend drop of any superhero movie. The United States once voted on a treaty that would have annexed the Dominican Republic with the ultimate goal of making it a state. Emperor Keiko, the 12th emperor of Japan, was traditionally said to have stood 10 feet 2 inches tall, fathered at least 80 children by multiple wives, and lived to the age of 143. These figures come from ancient Japanese chronicles such as the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki, which combine history, genealogy, and legendary elements. Because of this, historians consider many of the details attributed to Japan's earliest emperors to be symbolic or mythical, since there is very little contemporary evidence to confirm these extraordinary accounts. The movie Jaws caused a woman to develop a neurosis. After experiencing insomnia and anxiety, she began having seizures while screaming, "Sharks! Sharks!" One study found that Jaws is unusually effective at causing stress compared with other films, although it is unclear whether the suspense or the music is responsible. Titanic victim John Jacob Astor IV published a science fiction novel in 1894 about life in the year 2000. It included descriptions of a worldwide telephone network, solar power, air travel, and space travel to Saturn and Jupiter, which turned out to be remarkably accurate. Steven Spielberg was determined to release Schindler's List in 1993 in time for the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto, but Universal wanted him to finish Jurassic Park first. To keep Universal satisfied, he had George Lucas supervise the post-production of Jurassic Park while he filmed Schindler's List in Poland. 1 out of every 3 Americans lives in just 4 states: California, Texas, Florida, and New York. Aircraft controls must have standardized shapes. The flap lever is shaped like an airfoil. The propeller condition levers have ridged knobs. The thrust levers are smooth and cylindrical, and the landing gear lever is shaped like a wheel. The official Hypertext Transfer Protocol error code 418 means that the server is a teapot and refuses to brew coffee. Breaking Bad creator Vince Gilligan had originally planned to kill either Jesse or Hank during the first season as a bold ending. However, the writer's strike reduced production from 9 episodes to 7, and the death was ultimately removed because of the shortened season. Lin Chi, founder of Yuzu Games and producer of The Three-Body Problem, was poisoned with at least 5 different toxins by a coworker who was obsessed with Breaking Bad. Anthony Hopkins once searched all over London for the book The Girl from Petrovka without being able to find it. He returned home only to discover a copy of the manuscript on a park bench. It later turned out to be the author's own copy, which had been inside a stolen car before being abandoned by the thief. Babies born during the Dutch famine of 1944 to 1945 were more likely to become obese as adults than the general population. Danny DeVito's short stature is the result of multiple epiphyseal dysplasia, also known as Fairbanks disease. It is a rare genetic disorder that affects bone growth. Left-handed men are more likely to be homosexual than their right-handed counterparts.
If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and share it with your friends. Subscribe so you don't miss more interesting content. Leave your comments and click on any of these videos. See you next time.